just heard Penetralia from Hypocrisy on the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And this is the first of two parts that we'll be devoting to the always underrated Hypocrisy, a band that has seemingly tried to break up a couple times and just seems to always kind of be, find a second life.
Could be pulled back in, yeah.
Yeah, it keeps chugging along. And just when you think kind of they're kind of in a rut and kind of putting out really crappy records, they come back with like the last two records that they've done and kind of surprise people. And
what is it, Taste of Extreme Divinity, and what was the one before?
Virus. Both pretty remarkable records, really. And they kind of piqued our interest. We threw a tune from Taste of Divinity, Taste of Extreme Divinity, Extreme.
When I had the promo of it, I saw Taste of Extreme and I cut off like, that seems like a bad name for a record.
It's kind of weird. But we threw a tune on there at our top 20 of 2009, and
got me Village or something.
It was the opening song. I can't remember what the tune was right offhand. Valley of the Damned. Yeah. And
I was thinking Village of the Damned.
Yeah, there you go. But, great melodies. Hypocrisy's always been this weird band that's thrown a lot of melodic kind of Swedish death stuff in, but they never fit within the Gothenburg scene. And then they also had these punishing traditional death metal roots. Well, yeah, but it wasn't in the Stockholm scene.
Penetralia seemed like it's it's almost like it's Swedish death metal through the eyes of someone. Well, Tägtgren lived in the States for a while too, so I wonder if any of that, the New York style death metal stuff. He was part of
Malevolant Creation for a couple of years as well.
Yeah, I can see that those kind of influences coming in as well, but they've never really, until I think Abducted, I don't really think they felt like they had their own sound. Yeah, they're always kind of like searching for are we brutal? Are we melodic? How do we put those two together and make it sound like it's cohesive?
And in the saddest part is the song you just heard there, the title track Penetralia from their debut record Penetralia, is probably what they should have been doing those first couple records if consistently. Yeah. I mean that to me is Tägtgren seems to be pouring his whole heart out in that song, and maybe at this point he didn't have enough control of the band, because I think of this piece they're a 4 or 5 piece.
The 5 piece at this point with Masi Broberg from that went on to front Dark Funeral.
Yeah, or
vocally in Dark Funeral, and then we got Jonas Osterberg. We looked up his name. He sounds super familiar.
And this is the only record he's on as a guitar player, and this is the only record. There's 2 guitar players for Hypocrisy.
And then we've got the horror. I was thinking Horror isn't it now, but
the new vocal
Lars Skokie and Michael Hedlund. Yeah, they were kind of the core of Hypocrisy for
most of
their careers. Yeah,
I mean they were a 3-piece from when I kind of got into them with the Abducted record, all the way up through the early 2000s and stuff. But
I think Tägtgren and Swano kind of have like similar trajectories in their careers as well. They both have kind of bizarre bands as far as like Edge of Sanity never really fit into the whole mold of things. They both went on to like produce some of the most like seminal death metal records out there. Mm-hmm. And they never. I think Tägtgren now is starting to come back to. He seemed to like spread himself really thin for a lot of years, and now is coming back and like has some kind of renewed vigor to get back at the stuff.
Yeah, and he he clearly at this point doesn't have control over the band totally, as I was saying before. But on that song you just heard, Penetralia, it's the only song on really I think of any record where he's playing every single part. I mean, he's playing the keyboards, he's playing the drums,
he does
singing,
vocals on his turn,
and he's playing obviously all the guitar stuff, because he had only on the first record was only the guitar player,
Yeah.
And he's playing a lot of the leads and probably writing all the rhythm tracks that Osterberg's playing, but
and he produced it as well.
Yeah, and So he has his hand in the cookie jar, but really Penetralia, if you wanted some insight into where maybe the future of Hypocrisy sound was going to lead to, this is a really good indication. And then obviously the rest of Penetralia is a fairly brutal, straightforward death metal record, I think
it holds up a little bit better. Well, I have more respect for it now than I did when it first came out, because it
was in the rut of all this other stuff in 92.
All this like unbelievable stuff coming out, and this just kind of didn't really have enough. It wasn't doing anything that exciting to really like grab a whole lot of people's attention.
Well, and you probably expected that because it hailed from Sweden. You probably expected it to have some of those, I guess, those Stockholm qualities or the Gothenburg qualities, or
I wanted that Sunlight Studio sound. Yeah,
and it wasn't there. It was, as you said, more rooted in like a Suffocation, early Deicide, kind of New York death metal type sound, or even some of the Florida stuff. And they're a weird band. And I picked up Penetralia like 95, 96, and so this was kind of like different, because by the mid 90s you were getting flooded with all the melodic stuff by the mid 90s, and all the brutal stuff was kind of, gone. And so when I heard a tune like Nightmare, God is a, those were like, cool, man. Like, this is, kicking ass.
And going back and listen to it, it's got a pretty interesting production as well. This weird minor key vibe to the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that's that's probably the nature of Peter Tägtgren, who's he has produced all the Hypocrisy records, and it seems like each record he's trying to do something different. And like
he always does really interesting guitar tunings as well. Like there's something just a little bit off, not like in a bad way, but something that almost makes it a little bit more, that much more kind of like eerie and. Just kind of, I guess, kind of creates this whole kind of aura around him that nobody else really had.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think about like even like the most brutal of Swedish stuff, like early Entombed, early Dismember, early Grave, and there was nothing like overtly like evil or even kind of creepy about them in the same way that maybe you heard like a little bit more creepiness from like early Morbid Angel or early Deicide stuff where, like it's heavy, but it wasn't like it was atmospheric punky. And it was the repulsion.
Except the Left Hand Path track I think is one of the best. But as far as there's a lot more. You're looking at like the waveform of the whole thing. It's like a full warm kind of sound.
Absolutely.
Hypocrisy always seemed like they were like pulling certain key elements out that just felt a little off.
Yeah, it was sinister, and it had, like you said, those minor chords and those minor notes.
And the way he tunes stuff to where like when he holds out a note and the way it decays, it just sounds has like that weird Hello 8's creepiness kind of vibe to it,
which is cool now when you think about it, because it makes these records kind of stand out in their own sort of uniqueness. But the early stuff, especially the Penetralia and Obsculum, Obscenum, the first two are very brutal, very straightforward. You start to hear some of the more melodic elements come in, and you'll hear them in this next set that we're going to kind of get into here in a moment, especially in a tune like Infant Sacrifices from their second record, Obsculum. But, Nightmare and God Is A, which we're going to kind of kick things off with, they don't have some of the great soloing stuff that you just heard in Penetralia. They don't have all those, but they have a nice, a nice kind of, straightforward quality to them. And we were mentioning, you mentioned Edge of Sanity as a kind of a tentpole band that was sort of doing stuff like this, but also Cemetery was another Swedish band that didn't really have their own scene necessarily. They weren't plugged into like any one sound or one.
Yeah, I mean they're like, I guess, Evil Shade of Grey has I guess a bit more of the Entombed kind of vibe. Sure. But then Godless Beauty, the second record, just bizarre.
Yeah,
like they started going off, and then after that they almost get more of a rock doom kind of edge to them,
almost a gothy kind of atmosphere to them, and you hear a little
similar
bit
to kind of like what Tiamat was doing, I think.
Sure, that would make sense. Yeah, Tiamat is another weird band that doesn't necessarily fit in with what the rest of Sweden was doing. But you hear that in this next tune, Nightmare. You hear a little bit of the keyboards start to emerge, like you heard in Penetralia, and the keyboards are sort of doing a weird cemetery-ish type atmosphere thing.
It sounds almost like electric organ vibe instead of like the not like the Vincent Price kind of the scary keyboard, typical noise we're used to hearing in this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
plus seems a little more organic.
Plus you hear a lot of suffocation, I especially in a tune like Nightmare.
A lot of like Cannibal Corpse-ish vocals,
sure.
That the screechy Chris Barnes-ish kind of stuff.
Or Glenn Benton Deicide stuff, like in God Is A. So we're going to hear Nightmare and God Is A from the Penetralia record, and then we're going to kind of get into a pair of tunes from Osculum Obscenum, including the title track, which is one of the it's very dirty, sludgy, Autopsy meets Bolt Thrower meets Celtic Frost, kind of like
with a little bit of Grave sprinkled on.
It's just sloppy.
Good vocals on that track,
and you even mentioned that kind of an obscure band that this song kind of reminds you is 122 Stab Wounds. I remember talking about that, and you said, this tune has
the kind of the relentlessness that band has.
Yeah. So
that Norwegian band on Hidden Not Found. If you can find it, it's a fantastic.
I've been looking for a while, so I have not been able to find it. And then we're going to kind of end things with Infant Sacrifices, and we'll talk a little more about that song when we come back. But we've got two more, like I said, from Penetralia, Nightmare and God Is A, and then we get into their second record, which was put out in '93 with the title track Osculum, Obscenum, and Infant Sacrifices.
from here, and that's my goal. You always try to run away, but I'm in your dreams and I'm alive.
That was Infant Sacrifices, Osculum, Obscenum, Godiza, and Nightmare.
What is God?
I don't know.
Is God a lie? Is he a...
Yeah, God is
Who
a
knows?
lie. Yeah, because actually, on my copy, it's God is a ... but I think officially it's God is a lie is what the name of the song is.
I think the version... I've got the Metal Mind re-release. I think it might be in parentheses.
Yeah, just in case somebody can't figure out. Because he only screams it like
God
twice.
is a great man.
Yeah. But Infant Sacrifice is the last tune you just heard there. You definitely, near the end of the song, you start to hear a lot more enriched melodies kind of weaving their way through the song, which is pretty predictive of the future of where Hypocrisy is going to be headed. And if you haven't heard much Hypocrisy before, that's a pretty good indication of like where they're going to end up by the time, you know, they kind of flesh themselves out with Abduct It in the final chapter.
That's kind of the first hint of that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we hear.
I mean, you hear a little bit, I think, in the song we opened the whole show up with, Penetralia, but some people probably thought that was kind of a one-off tune because Peter was doing everything almost like showboating, you know, like, here's my, you know...
That was almost
kitchen sink
their left-hand path.
Yeah, exactly. You know, epic and long, and, you know, everything's kind of working on that song. But, that's the reason we picked Infant Sacrifices is because it does show you that they're not just going to do this sort of straightforward death metal, you know, New York style, or even the sludgy autopsy kind of stuff that you heard in the title track there, Obsculum Obscenum. But, were you and Chris, I know you said you kind of dug into Penetralia a little bit, but it kind of got left behind. What about Obsculum? Was this another record that you guys when it first came out?
And then shelved, I think.
Really?
I mean, it seemed pretty straight ahead because at the time we were, you know, getting into Gothenburg stuff and stuff that had, you know, more melodic stuff or more, technical stuff or overtly technical stuff. So I think initially this was just kind of something like, Hypocrisy record. Yeah. And at the time we were getting serviced so I don't even think I bought it. It was just something back when, in the great old days when we used to get promos of actual CDs before the digital crap, but hey.
We used to call ourselves, I remember back in Eclipse, we used to call ourselves promosexuals because we were addicted to promos.
That was great.
Oh, man. We used to get about 7 to 10 a week, I remember.
That was nice.
In the glory days,
On those choice labels that actually sent you the jewel cases instead of just the cardboard sleeve. So
the good old days when the music industry wasn't in a wreckage, But... yeah, and it's weird because like I came into Hypocrisy with Abduct It, and they were, I think, Killing Art and a couple tunes, and maybe even Roswell 47 were on a Nuclear Blast relapse sampler that Chris had given me when I first started hanging out at the record store. And those tunes in particular were pretty hip, and Chris said, hey, the Abduct It record's a pretty solid record, and it's got some Pink Floyd vibes going for it and stuff, and I was kind of like, oh, cool,
Yeah.
Because this is a time when I was trying to justify death metal to like some of the people on the outskirts of my friends or like girls that I was hanging out with, and so whenever I could find like a death metal band that like did something
that's
like,
some kind of appealing element.
Yeah, like when Tiamat Wild Honey came out, that was just like finally I've got something I can
mixtapes,
shove at people and show them, or My Dying Bride like Gods of the Sun or Angel of the Dark River, when that kind of stuff. So like tunes like Slipping Away kind of like grabbed me and pulled me in, and then I kind of went back to Penetralia and some of the more sinister stuff. But I remember we saw Hypocrisy, or you saw them too, right? When at the first Metal Fest that I went to.
97, right?
And I think, was that the second one you had gone to? Did you and Chris go to the Metal Fest prior to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a couple. And then there was the Michigan Death Fest as well, which were interesting.
Well, I think in the early 90s that probably had some...
It was pretty, well, yeah, I mean, like, Deceased and Gutted, if anybody remembers them, and I don't remember who else the hell was there. Summoning, or I don't know. It was mostly local stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't really pull in too many huge acts because they couldn't afford to fly more from Sweden.
Yeah. But I remember like seeing Hypocrisy at that 97 Metal Fest, and they killed live.
They were great. I was up on stage taking photos. I still got some of those.
And we were backstage, I think, partying with Peter and some of those guys. I actually got Penetralia and Abduct It signed by those guys. Because it was Danny Phil's birthday party. I remember celebrating with the old coffin cake with the
with the blood,
or not the coffin cake, but the tombstone cake. Yeah, with the raspberry like blood kind of stuff.
Pretty classy.
Yeah, and Peter was back there. We took some photos with him, and he was a pretty cool guy. But at that point, I think he had entered into a pretty serious. He was getting pretty serious with the Abyss Studios kind of stuff. So
yeah, that was
96-ish, 97 was right when he was kind of hitting with Enthroned, Darkness Triumphant, and
where he was producing almost everything,
all that stuff.
Yeah.
So Peter, I feel like he's always been like you said, he kind of lost his focus on Hypocrisy in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's kind of when Hypocrisy faded.
Yeah, he became more of a producer, and actually around this time too, he was doing like The Abyss.
Which was a black metal thing.
Black metal side project. The first one's decent from what I haven't listened to it since it came out, but I remember being pretty into it. And then the second one got all kind of bombastic and keyboardy and whatnot.
Which was the late 90s in a nutshell.
I think he was spreading himself too thin. I think he didn't know if he was going to be a producer or if he was going to go on with Hypocrisy. I know being a producer is much more lucrative than being in a death metal band.
Well, plus you don't have to go on tour, and you don't have to do all the stuff that, the painful stuff.
Which I don't think they really tour the United States much. It was just festival appearances, and I know they're doing a tour actually
right now. Correct.
In the next couple months.
Yeah.
March, April, May area, I think.
I think we're going to go check them out.
No, for sure.
But then they kind of make an interesting transition, though, with the Fourth Dimension, their third record, which they put out in, what did we figure out, 94? 94. 94. Obsculum is 93, 94. And talk about a pretty huge jump within a year. Mm-hmm. They slow things down. They get a lot more, doomy, a lot more melodic, very epic in a way. And we were
I think they started getting their own identity. I mean, they changed their logo for one. They have like better art direction. Yep. They seem to have like some kind of like cohesiveness to the lyrical content instead of just whatever jumps into their head.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, they start talking about, you start to hear some things, like Arrival of Demons and stuff that's, was a metaphor for kind of aliens and different things like that. And so
you start getting the alien fixation thing coming through.
Which really comes on Abduct It and Final Chapter. But, this record, I mean, in retrospect, it was a pretty awesome melodic kind of thing in the early 90s. And outside of like Tiamat Wild Honey, and I mean, there was very, very rare things. I can't think of anything that sounded like this. you know.
I think it was kind of ahead of its time, and that's why I don't think it really got a whole lot of publicity. I remember liking the second side of the tape better than the front side because that's the only way I read it.
Yeah, well, that was probably more the straightforward stuff, you know. And we were talking too that, you know, the tunes we picked out, Apocalypse and Reincarnation, you know, Apocalypse, the opening track, longer, more epic in scope, kind of like Penetralia, the title tune was. It never really gets the velocity going at all, and that was, you know, I think they were towing the line of, are they a death metal band? You know, are they going, you know, did they want to go so extreme away from the speed and intensity of those first two records that it may have off-put people a little bit, and people were maybe bored by like how slowed down things were.
Well, it seemed they had to, they couldn't make up their mind with, if we're going to be fast, we have to play brutal. If we're going to play anything melodic, we have to slow down.
Yeah.
Like, why can't there be some kind of, you know, bridging of the two?
And, of course, the bridging is coming, you know, with Abducted and Final Chapter when they finally find that perfect balance. And I think put together a pair of records that stand toe-to-toe with most of the other mid to late 90s death metal records of anywhere, I think, at that point, you know. You know, I mean, Carcass was doing some pretty melodic stuff in the mid 90s. You know, I mean, the In Flames, you know, the whole Gothenburg scene. But outside of that, you know, Hypocrisy kind of stood pretty uniquely alone with the record like Fourth Dimension.
Yeah, their idea of melody was completely different. Than they weren't being like guitar virtuosos or really like throwing a lot of notes. It was a lot of like, you know, thoughtful, a little bit more like mood setting.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is really when Peter kind of started to get into the Pink Floydisms and the psychedelia kind of stuff, because that obviously really influenced, especially what he does with Abducted and Final Chapter. You know, in terms of you know, some of the clean vocals that he does and stuff are incredibly influenced by that stuff. Yeah, and then we have Reincarnation, another tune from Fourth Dimension, and that's a little bit more mid-pace and definitely a precursor to the Abducted sound. It's got, you know, kind of brighter, happier melodies going. It's not as doomy as, say, Apocalypse, and again, kind of predictive of sort of where the future of these things are going. But again, mid-pace, so they haven't been able to like get the speed up. And then finally, we're going to end our set with
a little Killing Art.
Yeah, a little Killing Art. And this there was a video done for this, right? Was it on Headbangers or anything like that?
Oh yeah, it's the one where they're in the studio. And,
is it?
Yeah, Lars is eating a piece of pizza and stuff. I think that's the one.
Lars enjoyed his food. If you Hypocrisy's always had a thing.
Well, that's why he had the handlebar mustache, so he'd never get anything stuck in his chin.
There you go. But you know, Hypocrisy's always had this weird thing with larger drummers. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, Horg's a pretty hefty
beefy dude.
So yeah, maybe it just propels their sound for some reason, but it's a little.
It's a lot of calories to, you know, get all this stuff out.
Exactly. It's definitely a faster tune though, and this is, I think, where, you know, you can say that the Hypocrisy is starting to like kind of hit their stride in a way, and
they come into their own for sure,
and they're able to like push that melody into faster, more traditional sort of death metal songs. And you're also starting to pick up a little vibe of some black metal in this, some Nagelfarisms and stuff.
The gain and the high end is kind of like turned up a little bit more. I think more of a razor's edge, kind of abrasive feel of the guitars.
And I wonder if that's because Peter was starting to work with some of these bands. You know, he's hanging out with Dawn and Dimmu and some of these like Black Death kind of bands. And
Hypocrisy always seemed to be kind of a sponge as far as like anything he was producing would always like find some way into Hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Which, you know, for better or for worse, I don't know.
And it helped in some ways, and I think hurt him in other ways. But so, anyways, enjoy a trio of tunes here: Apocalypse, Reincarnation, and we'll end with Killing Art. That was Killing Art, Reincarnation, and Apocalypse. And the last tune there, Killing Art, as we mentioned before, comes from their 96 release, Abduct It, which I think he said this was the first time you noticed that Hypocrisy started to kind of get some critical acclaim, or at least a little bit of response from the album critics and magazines and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sure they got some beforehand, but this was like pretty huge. This was, when I was at Relapse, and really kind of, you could feel the kind of excitement around the record as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's when they put out the Shaped Chicken CD and all that stuff. And
I think, I think we were debating this before, who the first, was it Dissection or Hypocrisy that put out the Shaped disc for the first time?
I think they all kind of came out relatively
I know In Flames
close
was
to
the
one
last one.
Yeah, the Black Ash Inheritance.
But I can't remember if Where Dead Angels Lie or the Maximum Abducted.
They were both around at the same time.
Yeah.
Within a couple months of one another, I'm pretty sure.
And if you ever get one of those, word to the wise, don't ever insert it into a car stereo.
Oh, any kind of slot loading CD player.
It's a problem. I saw somebody have
the chicken one's the only one I don't have anymore.
Yeah, I don't have that one either.
Jeff does.
Really?
Grant Corcoon does.
Grant Corcoon has it?
Yeah, that's the only one I don't have. I've got the...
he would have something like that. He has such a random collection of like...
He has the steel 7-inch.
I have that.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. The steel 7-inch.
I borrowed it from him and recorded it.
I think we should do we should do that sometime, like a random side project, whole show. We could do steel and...
you could do a whole Dan Swano show.
Yeah.
Pandemonium, every other thing he did.
And Hypocrisy, and Peter was starting to get involved in some stuff at this point, too, besides The Abyss. He was getting involved in that crappy band Pain, which was like industrial metal.
That did very well for him.
Yeah, but he was kind of seizing on the, I guess what was a little more popular at the time,
Didn't he do a Beatles cover that was pretty big?
That one doesn't strike me.
What the hell is that?
You have to think on that one. Maybe we'll have to.
That was John Lennon, Imagine.
He did?
Yeah.
Really?
He did.
On Pain?
Yeah, on Pain.
Oh, jeez. I never owned a Pain record, so I don't know.
It's awful. I saw them. They were at the Jersey Metal Fest.
Were they?
Yeah, they played that. Horg was playing with them, too.
I must have wandered off during that set.
I think I hadn't seen Hypocrisy and all. Like, I'll give Pain. It was, I don't know who else. Nobody else of interest was playing. So.
Yeah. That's funny. I don't even remember walking out and seeing them. But I think the tune, Killing Art was kind of a big song, but I think the song that really defined the sort of mid-90s Hypocrisy at this point was the next tune that we're going to get into, and that's Roswell 47. And it's
kind of their Hangar 18, I think.
Yeah, there you go. And, again, another kind of government conspiracy type tune, just like, Megadeth. And the thing that was so strange is there was definitely no death metal band that I can think of that was writing lyrics like this or writing so many songs that were focused on something that was so traditionally, I guess, not death metal. It wasn't gore, it wasn't violence, it wasn't Satan.
It was a concept record to some degree as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's about aliens, and I don't know if they were seizing on sort of the feeling of that was going on with like X-Files and kind of the obsession that was happening then, and maybe Peter, that's what sort of got Peter into it. But I always got a feeling that Peter was a huge X-Files fan and just kind of wanted to devote a lot of his tunes to that type of stuff, But
there's some Morley cigarette references in the lyrics too, so watch out.
Yeah, cigarette smoking fan. There you go. But Roswell 47, I mean. It's if this song doesn't hook you, I don't really know what can, because this is sort of the total Hypocrisy package in a way.
That's a great vocal performance too, like a lot of kind of depth to what he's doing. I think this is probably one of my favorite vocal performances. This entire record, I think, really kind of highlights what he's possible.
Yeah,
what's possible.
Absolutely. I mean the intensity that he has in the pre-chorus that builds. And that's when Lars really kicks in with the drums, and there's like a propulsion like moving towards the Roswell 47.
Yeah, there's so much gain, and there's definitely a black metal influence, I think, on this vocal delivery and the kind of effects they're using.
But it's warm too. It's got a very analog kind of feel to it, and the tune after that, Rival Demons Part 2, which is a continuation from the Fourth Dimension, has some of the most like weird, beautiful like melodies mixed in with brutality and kind of like eerie lyrics and all these sort of things. It's a weird
It breaks in when it kind of breaks down. It's like a fantastic like mosh song.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then we'll end with an even more beautiful song, which is kind of their, I guess, I don't know, their ballad, if you will. If Hypocrisy ever wrote a ballad, it might be Slipping Away.
Yeah, it could fall in that
Pink
category.
Floydish.
Sure.
I don't know if it's a ballad in the way like they're not writing about like a girlfriend or something, but it's.
I think ballads almost anymore. I think people just think of their slow song.
Yeah, exactly. And so if that's what you think of as a ballad, then it definitely has that kind of parts. But this
pretty
is
epic. This
is really the melody set, if you will. All three of these songs are just dripping within different melodies that sort of weave in and out, vocal harmonies, all kinds of stuff. And I think this is a true litmus test of whether or not you dig what Hypocrisy is all about. Is if you dig these three songs, I think there's a lot of room for you to become a Hypocrisy fan.
Well, and I think they've managed to finally on Abducted take all these different influences and songs that might stand out on another record, made all these different things make sense, and just this album actually has a flow to it, which a lot of the other ones don't.
Yep.
Like if you take any of the songs out of order, it doesn't quite feel right.
Yep. I would agree, and it's got an intro track that bleeds into Roswell 47, and just even like the last tune, Drained, is almost kind of linked to Slipping Away. It's another fairly melodic, kind of slow balladly kind of song and stuff. So yeah, it's a really well put together song, and I mean really in a way. Or not put together song, but album. And I think 96 was, where Peter really is hitting his stride as a producer as well. This is when he's about to put out Dawn Slaughter's Son and Dimmu Borgir and just, album after album that was coming out Abyss at this time. And I think this is like he's putting his heart and soul into his own Hypocrisy record before he starts to get burnt out as a producer. And this and the final chapter are kind of his last great statements before he kind of goes into a slump. So... But we'll talk briefly about Final Chapter in a moment when we come back. But enjoy Roswell 47, Arrival of Demons, Part 2, and Slipping Away. Slipping Away, Rival of Demons Part 2, and Roswell 47. And we're going to kind of end things here tonight with, Hypocrisy by late 96, early 97. They contributed a song to the Beauty and Darkness EP, which was a fairly cool EP that was actually put out by Nuclear Blast.
Various artists, and actually it wasn't just crap you could get on other albums.
Yeah.
Actually, different versions of stuff, like some Pyogenesis stuff that was.
Well, I had that one song from Pyogenesis that I think it's the only place you can get.
Yeah,
it,
Symbol of Disgrace, and that was after they kind of like abandoned death metal. They went back and did this great doom metal song.
Yeah,
so
it's pretty neat.
sweet.
And you heard, like Request Denied, which you'll hear.
It starts with Moonshield.
Moonshield from In Flames, and that was prior to Jester Race coming out, I think.
Yeah,
and so that was the first place you could hear a tune like Moonshield. I feel like was Nepenthe on there? I think Nepenthe from Sentence was on there as well.
I think either that or The War Is Not Over or something.
Yeah, something. So it was just a really great indication of like what Europe was up to with the more melodic side of death metal rather than some of the brutal stuff. I mean, there's some clunkers, some crappy.
Lacrimosa.
Yeah, and
Therion.
Temega. Yeah. Oh my god,
it's pretty bad.
crappy stuff. But
it'd be nice to actually go back to have labels put out some compilations like this that actually have exclusive material.
Sure, like the very first. What was that first thing Century Media put out, In the Eyes of Death?
Yeah, Eyes of Death comp is fantastic.
That's a pretty
everything on that is
riveting thing.
Is different versions of tracks or unreleased things.
And Beauty and Darkness, I remember.
It's cheap too. You get it for like $9.
Beauty and Darkness?
No, or In the Eyes of Death.
Can you really?
Yeah.
Where?
Amazon Marketplace or
I need to get that.
Yeah, it's got some good stuff on it.
I mean, I know we played some of those versions.
It's got like Winter Shadow, different like versions of Winter Shadow and stuff.
Yeah. But Hypocrisy contributed a song to there, and again, it's kind of like Roswell 47 Part 2. This next song, Request Denied, but it almost like amps up the emotions and even some of the drama a little bit. Like there's a more imminent nature to the song and to some of the singing that he gets into here with Request Denied. And we talked about which version we wanted to play, the Beauty and Darkness version or the version that the final polished version that appears on Final Chapter. And we went with the Final Chapter version because it's got a little bit more punch to it. There's some really cool pinch harmonics as we go into the chorus and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this is some of Peter's awesomest like deep vocals. I mean, he really goes into like just a total guttural sort of thing, but it's like in a cool, almost catchy sort of way. It's not in a like total over the top Chris Barnes crap kind of way,
Yeah, Chris Barnes has his charms.
Well,
but
sure,
I think he, everything's
we love
like
Cannibal here.
It's bathed in. I think he integrates it more into the music. It's not over the top, or it's not on top of everything else, like screaming at you.
It's seamless with the music.
Yeah.
It's very cool, and it's a good way to sort of end Hypocrisy Part 1 here and kind of send us off with a sort of epic kind of way. But let us know what you thought. If I know Hypocrisy is a band that flies under the radar for a lot of people, and maybe you're unfamiliar, especially with this era. Maybe you've heard Hypocrisy in recent years or some of their early 2000 records and are kind of maybe lukewarm on them, or maybe you're one of those people who kind of came into metal in the early 2000s and you think, oh man, those early.
I know a lot of people that, at least through working at the record store, that were into Pain and then got into Hypocrisy from that.
Yeah, or and then they probably listened to some of those like kind of quote unquote, I guess, lackluster Hypocrisy records.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is a breath of fresh air, and you can kind of go, oh man, I didn't even know this.
You can go and sell your Pain records.
Yeah, there you go. But let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com or check us out on the website requiempodcast.com, where you can leave some comments or donations. You got mugs and t-shirts and other good things for sale on there.
Yeah, lots of things to help out with the expenses of the site.
Sure.
Much appreciated.
And check us out on iTunes. You can leave us a comment. We always appreciate kind of getting feedback on iTunes and stuff, or on Facebook at Mark and Jason.
Yeah.
Man, there should be a picture of us like hugging on there. But anyways, here's Request Denied. Stick around in when you'll be getting Hypocrisy Part 2 pretty soon here. So if you liked what you heard, keep on listening. So enjoy Request Denied for Record Mile Podcast. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.